I see a lot of people who kind of sit in one place, maybe one job, one location, one situation for many, many years. I think a lot of them do that because it's the safe thing to do.
When I see people going through a tough time financially, a lot of times I'm like, that must just mean that God has some big plans for you financially, because he wouldn't be giving you this tension if he wasn't trying to mold you into a human being that can attract, sustain, scale, and share more.
You really need to be aligned with who you are internally and the work and the business you're trying to do. Otherwise, it's just not going to work.
Hi, I'm Justin Buonamo, and this is Wisdom is Wealth. Wisdom is Wealth is designed to give you guys practical insights, modern strategies, and even timeless philosophies around gaining wisdom in your life. The wiser we get, the wealthier we will become. This podcast really is inspired by the book of Proverbs in the Bible, which was written by King Solomon, who prayed to God for wisdom, and as a byproduct became the wealthiest person to ever live. If he was still alive today in present day, he'd be worth $1.3 trillion with a T. Not because he prayed for wealth, but he prayed to God to give him wisdom. And as he grew wiser, as a byproduct, he grew wealthier, particularly financially, but not just stopping there, in every facet of his life. And in my own life, I have realized that the wealthier I become, it's truthfully just because I have become wiser in life. I'm gonna bring on guests that are incredibly successful, incredibly amazing human beings, and have an amazing financial wealth that they've grown for themselves. And they're gonna share wisdom on their life experience in totality in hopes that something becomes valuable for you to implement in your process, in your life, and in your journey, and see how wisdom truthfully is wealth. Welcome back to another episode of Wisdom is Wealth. I'm here with my boy Chris Nichols, also known as Nickels and Dimes, which I absolutely love the nickname, and that's from his short-lived attempt to make rap music. Chris is now the host of the Nickels and Dimes Show, a podcast focused on entrepreneurs in the world of pro sports, health, wellness, and fitness. He also has a business background in cybersecurity software, which he is currently leveraging to help build companies in that space. Chris was born in San Diego and grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii, which is just the two coolest destinations ever, but grew up in Honolulu before attending Santa Clara University, where he studied marketing and played NCAA Division I water polo, which you just got the coolest facts about you, but I think that might be the coolest one. And Chris's goal is to make the world as small as possible by connecting with others and bringing people together through shared experiences. And Chris is just a really, really good human being. He's got a really awesome podcast where he has had a bunch of amazing guests on himself. And it's just, as you can just tell from his bio, his perspectives and his experiences in life and his interests and his character, as you'll get to know here very shortly, all come together to create just, I think, awesome wisdom that I'm excited to have Chris share today with the audience. And so, Chris, welcome to the show, man. I know we've been trying to make this happen for a minute now, and I'm so happy we were able to, dude.
Justin, thank you so much for having me, and what a nice intro. I really appreciate that. I'm glad we're finally doing this. It's been so cool to watch your journey, and especially with your rebrand lately, to focus more on the wealth aspect of things and how that expands beyond just finances, but into people's wealth of living and life. And I'm excited to talk to you more about what you're up to as well. But thank you again for having me.
Of course, dude. Of course. And as mentioned, you're like, yes, this podcast is about financial wealth, but mainly it's about gaining wisdom in life, which is, I think, what makes you skilled at living. And as a byproduct, we, I think, gain not just financial wealth, but wealth in all aspects of our life, And I think a big part of gaining wisdom is having strong experience in many different things in life. And you've had experience in multiple industries, whether it's sports, business, cybersecurity, podcasting, just to name a few. What's the biggest piece of wisdom you've gained about navigating transitions and reinventing yourself, which I think is super important in today's day and age, especially if you want to gain wealth in all aspects of your life?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that question because it honestly reflects my journey quite a bit, and I believe in it heavily. Going through different transitions and challenging yourself constantly to grow. I see a lot of people who kind of sit in one place, maybe one job, one location, one situation for many, many years.
Yep.
And I think a lot of them do that because it's the safe thing to do. It seems like the stable thing to do. It's more of a risk adverse approach.
Yeah.
And I've always been excited by taking risks. They certainly have made me very uncomfortable in life at many points. But I look back and I attribute each of those moments of the highest discomfort in these transitions as the most applicable to my growth and who I've become today. And I would even argue to say that in the past, 10 to 15 years of my career experience, I think that I could even argue it's maybe 30 years of experience because of how many twists and turns there have been and different things that I've tried. So I would answer that with constantly challenging yourself. If you ever find yourself getting complacent or comfortable with something, you need to shake something up. And sometimes I've noticed in life that just because I believe that God has my favor, he's going to shake it up for me as soon as I start getting comfortable. And then I have to respond to that.
Dude, that's so good because a couple of things that you said there. One, like if you're getting comfortable, shake it up because nobody grows when they're comfortable. Nobody grows when they're comfortable, right? You mentioned God. God develops us in tension. Right? God develops us in tension. Particularly, I've seen that financially too. A lot of times for the financial piece of this, like when I see people going through a tough time financially, a lot of times I'm like, that must just mean that God has some big plans for you financially because he wouldn't be giving you this tension if he wasn't trying to mold you into a human being that can attract, sustain, scale, and share more. And so God gives us our mountains as medicine, that tension, right? And that's the main time. I don't want to say the only time, but I'd say the main time where we grow and we grow the most. And so I love that. If you feel comfortable, shake it up a little bit. And then you mentioned people staying in one job, one location, one something, right? Out of familiarity or out of what they think is being risk adverse. And I kind of call it middle class mindset, right? Where middle class mindset is like, let me just play it safe, right? Not take any risk, save my money, be as safe as I possibly can, and hopefully retire when I'm 65, right? And it's funny because the middle class, they label themselves as risk adverse, but I personally label them as the riskiest of them all. Why? Is because there's studies where I'm sure you've probably seen or heard about these studies before, but they interview hundreds of people on their deathbed and ask them, what are their biggest regrets in life? And the answer, usually number one, number two, or number three, is usually some form of I didn't take enough risk in life, right? And so you try to be risk adverse, but then you end up living a life that you aren't fully fulfilled with or even regret for many reasons. And a lot of the regret is tied to the lack of risk taking, right? And so I absolutely love that answer, man, because it's so helpful and so true in so many different ways. And again, you just even with moving from Hawaii to San Diego and, several of the transitions that you've made and just you even being a diverse person with the interests that you have, right? I think that you're constantly putting yourself in a place of discomfort, which leads to growth. And so I love that, man. And so I think something else that you're really, really good at is building strong relationships. And as you stated in your bio, making the world as small as possible, which I absolutely love. And, that's a big part of your mission. And so what are key principles of networking and connection that have led to real financial and life opportunities for you? And a little side note here, I'm going to ask you a question and then say something, but Chris's podcast is freaking awesome. He's got some amazing people on there. He's had like Sean Merriam on there for the football fans out there, Dave Meltzer, a couple of incredible human beings. And when you talk to people from all different socioeconomic statuses, you do this thing called gain perspective on life, because life is lived so many different and beautiful ways outside of what we saw growing up or what we're currently seeing in our environment right now. Nothing wrong with our upbringing and or current environment, but at the same time, there's so many other ways to see, view, and live life. And Chris has talked to so many different people from different backgrounds, socioeconomic statuses, in many facets of his life, but particularly his awesome podcast. So now that I just asked you a question and filled it with my own answer, I'm going to ask the question again. So building strong relationships and making the world as small as possible is a big part of Chris's mission. And so I'm curious, dude, what are key principles of networking and connection that have led to real financial and life opportunities for you?
Sure. So I'd say the biggest thing I've taken away after 2 years of doing the Nichols and Dime show has been the relationship capital that I've built. And I started the podcast with the intention of learning directly from entrepreneurs in my own way, who I found, and just people who I found fascinating. And I started off with a general niche of entrepreneurship, where I feature guests who are in my network. And ideally, the plan was to, and what I do at the end of every episode is I tap into that network effect, and I ask every person, hey, who's one person from your network you think I should have on my podcast, based off what I focus on. And it has expanded my network tremendously. And it's been a bonding experience for me with every guest I've had on the show. As you mentioned earlier, I do all of my episodes in person, and I think that is very powerful, right? That's just one thing coming out of the COVID years. I wanted to really reconnect with somebody in the most genuine way possible, with no distraction. And when you're being filmed and having an intentional conversation, people are putting on their best presentation, and it makes for an amazing 1 hour conversation, which it typically is on my podcast. It's even much more powerful than if you just went to catch up with somebody at a restaurant for lunch or for dinner. You have the waiter coming over, and there's just distractions, right? So I really wanted to dive into that again. I've always been a fan of having these deep, real conversations, and just expressing my true, genuine curiosity, and making an effort to do that, and flying to my guest traveling wherever they might be, setting up my equipment in their warehouse, in their office, in their house. I think that goes a long way with a lot of the guests, and they really appreciate that. And then they like the work that I do, and then they want to support me. And that support can come in the form of introducing me to somebody like Sean Merriman, right?
Yeah.
So I think, one thing that David Meltzer is a big fan of, he made a tweet or the other day, I think, where he said, serve others first before asking for things, or and then let it come back around. I forget exactly what it was, but yeah, I follow that methodology when it comes to relationship building and networking. And I feel like that's a skill that I've had ever since, really my whole life. And it was the reason why I got in sales, in my tech career. And I've moved all over the country, and every place I've lived, I've been able to build a community. So I wanted to really lean into that when I started this podcast. And then I did that through bringing guests on where I would learn from them, instead of trying to act like an expert up front and just talk. I wanted to learn from them first, and then gather that knowledge, and then try to share it back in the creative ways that I've tried to do.
Yeah, just an intentional effort to build that relationship capital through humility and that servant leadership type of energy that you carry. And I love that, man. And it's so true. Like, serving or providing value or giving impact or showing humility is just a great first step when it comes to building relationships that then become profitable. Right? And profitable can be obviously just be the connection that you make with them, the support that you give each other, or the connections that they make for you with other people that lead to additional opportunities, financial or not. And so, I remember when I first got introduced to you by our friend Jess Bergio. I'm not even just saying this because you're on my show and you're saying it a little bit right now, but I was like, man, this dude does a lot for his guests. Like, just a very humble approach. He's willing to, if he feels like he wants to learn from that person and his audience would gain a ton of value, like you were really willing to do whatever you had to do to figure out how to get that guest on. So you could learn from them, you could give them an opportunity, and then your guys' amazing conversation would benefit the audience and beyond. And so one of my favorite books it's called The Servant. I believe I shouldn't say it's my favorite book and then stumble on the title, but it's called The Servant. It's a leadership-based book. And it talks about a lot of the principles that you're saying. Like, if you truthfully and intentionally just want to serve people, and that's going to show through your interactions with everybody. And so I think we back. Sorry, I think we cut out a little bit. No worries. And so okay. I was just saying that, like, that servant mentality is just really just truthfully wanting to do what's best for you and everybody around you. And the benefits just are automatically almost magnetized to that mentality. And so I love that, man. And I appreciate you sharing that. And again, I sense that with you, from the very beginning. And so when I come out to San Diego in October, I'm inviting myself. I know you already invited me on the podcast, but I'm inviting myself. We're doing it in October.
I love it.
and I think I fit well from a lot of, the past things that I have, current and past things that I have going on, because you interview entrepreneurs in pro sports, health, and wellness. And so I know I'm biased because I'm an ex-athlete, right? And I'm in entrepreneurship and I'm big into health and wellness, but that's a great group of people. They've got a lot of really good characteristics, right? And so what's a reoccurring mindset or habit you've noticed among the most successful individuals that you've interacted with on your journey, and how can the everyday person apply that to build wealth in their own life?
So another question I ask at the end of every episode with all my guests is, what's an entrepreneurial life hack that goes against the mainstream belief?
Good question.
And I've had some episodes where I talk about those answers as a group. Like, well, I'll look back on a quarter of episodes and I'll say, hey, these were some of the answers I took away, and this was a trend I noticed. And now looking back at about 85 episodes I've done so far over the past couple of years, I would say that the one thing that stuck out to me that people touch on is you really need to be aligned with who you are internally and the work and the business you're trying to do. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. And as a part of that, people say this hustle culture mentality is kind of BS. It's not really it. And because, you can get distracted online with all this business influencer content, and people are saying get after it. And, these people work hard, but they're trying to say something else. They're talking about, you got to do the work on yourself so that you are balanced and truly believe in what you're doing. And then the money, the success will follow that. And that's just super, super important. So, and then I think as a result of that, you will be able to more clearly find who your audience is, who is your customer, right? You can't just, if you're just throwing it out there too broadly, then, when is it going to stick? Sometimes that is a strategy to find your audience, but it is important to really know who you are trying to help.
Yeah. I think that's just great advice, because it reminds me of the quote that income is just a byproduct of impact, right? And the most successful entrepreneurs, or even the most financially successful people, I believe that they understand that the importance of saving and investing, but they realize they're going to build a world-class wealth by developing a world-class solution to a major problem out there. And why I bring that up is because to be a person of value or a business of value, before I even go to that, I truthfully believe that on the word of value, we are paid into direct proportion to the value that we put out into the world, right? And not withhold or have within us, or the potential of value, the value that we put out into the world. We're paid in direct proportion to that. And so to be a person or a company of value, I truthfully believe a big component of that is having an incredible solution to a major problem out there, right? And so I think when you have incredible solutions to things, that's because you're trying to have an impact. You care about what you're doing. You're passionate about the people that you want to work with. And when you can have that as your recipe, if you will, or your approach, usually that's when you make the most money possible. Not going into it for the money. It's okay to understand that you're going to make some money in the process. It might be a byproduct. And don't get me wrong, it's a big part of why I went into business was the potential for money. But I quickly realized that the amount of money and or financial well-being that you have is strongly tied to your internal wealth. Right? You're aligned and healthy yourself because you're an energetic match to what you attract, right? And a big part of that internal wealth is truthfully trying to just have an impact on this world, provide value, take care of people, have people's best interests in mind, be an incredible human being who offers a great solution to a major problem, right? And usually when you can get that down, is kind of what you're saying, you're finding the trend between the successful entrepreneurs that you're finding. That's usually what leads to the most financial wealth, not directly and selfishly going in just for those monetary reasons. And so I think that's absolutely phenomenal advice. And again, I'll recap it one last time here. Is it just his response reminds me of the quote, income is just a byproduct of impact, right? And we are paid into direct proportion to the value that we put out into the world. Right? And the more value we put out in the world, the more impact we make, the more income that'll come in. And so, Chris, I appreciate you sharing that so much, dude. And as we're coming to the end of the episode here, I wanted people, just like I said, get the taste of your character, right? Which has just been grade A since I've met you, right? And you just are also just not even just grade A character, but you have just such a cool story, a lot of fun things that you've done and or are currently doing. And, just like you love to learn from people, I've been following your podcast journey and seeing the people that you've been having on, the conversations that you've been conducting, the way that you're leading, right? And just such a humble and servant mentality. And honestly, the episodes are fire. And so I was like, not only is Chris someone I want to learn from, but I know he's learned a ton on his own podcast journey. And so I appreciate you coming on today and sharing your wisdom. And so for anybody, I'll let Chris here tell you where to find him specifically. But the Nickels and Dimes podcast, man, you got to check it out. A lot of really fun topics, really fun guests, and Chris is an amazing host himself. And so thank you today, Chris, for coming on the other side of the microphone, if you will, and being the guest. And we just really appreciate you being here. And so before we hop off, just let people know where they can find you and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you, Justin. Yes, the journey has been incredible just because I really believe I've done this fully organically, and how I've expanded the network and I've been able to get UFC superstars, NFL superstars, and others on the podcast, and so people who are in business, in some sort of business that is in the world of sports, fitness, health, which is just something I've been passionate about. And I've been able to narrow down that niche really into the second year of doing the show, as I look back and see who are my guests, what is my network. So I just did this truly by organic discovery. And I believe it'll continue to niche down, and I'll be able to connect with more of a specific audience. But that was my intention when I started it. I wanted to, I had full open-mindedness to see how it might evolve. I was not going to be stubborn about what I thought it was supposed to be when I started it. So yes, it's been a super rewarding journey to meet these people, learn from them, be surrounded by greatness in many cases. But how can you find the show? So one thing that I come across when I tell people about the podcast is I have to spell it out for them, because my last name is Nichols, and it's, I got to help them spell it. It's spelled Nichols, Nichols and Dimes, Dimes with a Z. So if you just search Nichols and Dimes Show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, you'll be able to find it. And I think there's some really cool stories with these guests that no matter who you are, I think a lot of people will be able to connect with them, and especially if they're going through some sort of transition, because each of my guests also have a story of transition where they maybe went from the military into becoming an entrepreneur. Maybe they went from being a pro athlete into becoming an entrepreneur. And all of these are big adjustments. And how do they leverage what they learned from something pretty different before and apply it to building a business? I think this can apply to more than just entrepreneurship, but also intrapreneurship. So if you are trying to make a strong impact within an organization or a company, a lot of this can contribute to that mindset that can make you better at doing that. So the Nichols and Dimes Show, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, Nichols and Dimes, and then the podcast Instagram is Nichols and Dimes Show.
Awesome, dude. Awesome. And just super valuable with what you're doing with the podcast. And the last thing I'll say, it's like, you're the prime example of you figure it out by rolling it out, or you figure out how to do the thing by doing the thing, right? And, it just seems like You're really figuring out how to find not just your perfect guest for the show, but to be able to construct a conversation that just truthfully impacts the audience, man. And aside from your show, I think that's exactly what you did here today on my show, my man. And so I'm extremely grateful for having you here today. I know the audience is going to get a ton from this episode, and just thank you so much for being on the podcast today, my man.
Thank you, Justin. I'm excited to see your journey as well with the rebrand and what you continue to do to help impact people, and stoked to see you out in San Diego later this year.
Thank you, brother. Yeah, I can't wait for that. So you guys stay tuned for that episode, the Nichols and Dime shows. But in the interim, thank you for coming to another episode of Wisdom is Wealth. I hope that you enjoyed. As always, I'm trying to make content that changes the world, and amazing guests like Chris help with that. But what also helps is you being able to download, leave a 5-star review, and share with other people who you heard this message and you're like, ooh, I gotta send this to them because it's exactly what they're going through and this is gonna impact them greatly. So share, download, like, subscribe, rate, and we'll see you in the next episode.